Fontaine in 4.0 is finally here, and with it comes a character that has been anticipated by many since the very first Genshin story trailer was revealed. Ever since we saw his kit, there have been a ton of questions as to how practical and how good he actually is, with some saying that he's extremely strong and some saying that he's worse than the very first monopyro DPS Klee. So what is the truth? Welcome to Jello Impact, where we build and test every single character to help you decide who you want to wish for and build. Lyney is an on-field bow pyro DPS whose passives and kit highly encourage play in a monopyro team. Monopyro hasn't been short of on-fielders as of late, so there has been some question as to whether or not Lyney would be a worthwhile addition to that roster. Well, I've tested him for quite a number of hours at this point, and even with his signature artifact set, which most people don't have, and I can confidently say that I believe him to be the best character for this role, and surprisingly a ton of fun as well. Let's start off with his pros and cons. Lyney's first strength is that he has strong personal scaling and passives. His numbers have really good scaling, so leveling them up is going to give you good returns. And his passive that gives additional damage for every pyro character on the team is really beneficial to his overall damage. He has good synergy with monopyro units, Bennett, Sangling, and Kazuha. And the most surprising thing to me when I was actually playing is that the taunt created by his charge attack and by his burst is actually really effective at preventing from enemies from aggroing you. Unlike other taunts, such as the one made by Ganyu's skill, although it gets destroyed, you're making a new taunt with his charge attacks and burst, so more often than not, you have a taunt in place, so he's not going to be getting hit as much. This allows him to be played without a shielder, which is a good thing because otherwise you lose quite a bit of damage from not having Zhongling on your team. His nuke damage from his skill exploding those Malkin hats is actually really relevant, and it gives you some nice front-loaded bursty type damage, which allows you to clear a low HP wave or make sure you can do as much damage as possible to a boss while it's in a vulnerable phase. This is different than characters like Dia or characters like Klee or Diluc or any other character that you might use in a monopyro slot, because none of those characters have quite a strong bursty type damage as this one. It really is very noticeable. This is a character that also scales really well for vertical investment, so getting his signature bow, getting any 5-star bow is good, but his signature bow is even better. Getting a really high investment artifact set or even getting some constellations are going to contribute pretty well to his overall damage, and it's definitely something that you can consider, if not right away, for the long term. If you are playing at the beginning of 4.0 and you are thinking about the weapon banner and getting his weapon, I hate to say it, but it now is a pretty good time to do so. This is a really good weapon banner. You can check out my full review in another video. He also has pretty flexible rotations. He's not tied to a specific rotation, such as characters like Wanderer or Raiden or Sino or a lot of other characters who have like some sort of elemental infusion or buffed state, which means they have to stay on field for a certain amount of time. Lyney's not that way. You can use a couple charge attacks, switch off, come back. You can build the rotations how you want. This is gated a bit by the fact that you do want him to be as buffed as possible by Bennett, so you do end up using the same rotation most of the time. However, depending on the enemies and the waves and what the enemies are doing, you do have some flexibility in how you use him. His first weakness and his biggest weakness, in my opinion, is that he is pretty one-team locked. He really only has one team, and that actually feels really good. Of course, if you're going to use him in the overworld, you're going to do other stuff like that, his other teams are going to be fine. But to get max damage and actually clear the abyss comfortably, you're pretty much going to have to be using this team. He doesn't have that good of free-to-play weapon options. I'm using the Amos bow that I got from the standard banner, and it is good for him, and I have felt great using it. You can use the slingshot and certain other weapons. We'll go over his weapons more later, but the difference between any free-to-play weapons and his signature weapon or other 5-star weapons, especially his signature, is pretty massive. His other con is he's pretty prone to one-shotting because he has very low HP and very low defense, and because you're not building him with any defense and HP, and you're in his best teams, you're not running him with a shielder or any type of damage mitigator. We'll talk more about that later, but because of that, he is quite prone to being one-shot, which is obviously not great. His damage can be a little backloaded because you're generally going to want to use his burst and skill closer to the end of your rotation, but you can use it at the start if you're trying to clear a low HP wave, so there is some flexibility. The final con, and another big one, is tied to his team building. Because he has such strict team building requirements, slotting in some other type of element, such as an electro character to defeat Asamon or a hydro character to defeat some pyro shields, is very difficult because he's so tied to this team to get the most damage out of him possible. And unlike someone like Child, he doesn't bring a new element to the table, and so he's kind of hurt a bit in elemental check type abysses and lack of team flexibility, and he's gonna need more vertical investment such as his 5-star weapon to really brute force through those things, through those types of enemies, or just really, you know, good gameplay or good artifact investment. I probably could have beat Asimon in a reasonable time if I had his 5-star weapons or even more cracked out artifacts, but it would have been nice just to be able to slot in some sort of electro character instead. Now that we know his pros and cons, let's talk about his value and strength. First, looking at his power level, I would say his power level is actually high. It's higher than I thought it was going to be. I thought he was going to feel a little underwhelming, but after testing him out for quite a long time, I feel he's actually quite a strong character. I feel like he lands squarely somewhere in the tier 1 category, not tier 0 like the top characters, but squarely in the tier 1. Is he higher or lower? That's going to take me a bunch more testing, but I feel very confident that that's where he belongs. So he's a really good character, but not an insane character, and definitely a lot better than if people are calling him mid. Definitely doesn't feel mid. He feels pretty strong. I do think that if people don't have his signature artifact set, I've gotten really lucky getting mine together. He gets a massive power boost from his artifact set, so potentially that's a big reason why people aren't liking him too much right now, but I do believe over time his perception will increase, and really I don't think the damage is the biggest problem. The problem is the lack of teammate diversity, in my opinion. In terms of value, unfortunately, I think he's a low value character for most people. I think he could be good, but I do think, like, we have Child coming in the next patch, right? Why would you get Lyney when you can put Child in this team and have a team that can be much more flexible? It has higher ceiling in AoE. I'm not sure about its ceiling in single target. Maybe Lyney can pair, especially with vertical investment. But in AoE, Child is going to mop the floor with him, and he uses the exact same team. And Child can deal with a lot more enemies and a lot more variety, and Child is serviceable in single target and also has more flexibility. So I think that in terms of value, he doesn't really get there for most players. There might be one or two cases and one or two accounts where, you know, if you happen to have Bennett, Kazuha, Sangling free and you have his specific bow, that he might be a good pull. But even then, Child does pretty well with that bow too. If you really like Lyney though, he performs very well, and he's very strong and fun to play, so you won't be disappointed with him, right? I think people, if they build him properly, they'll be more satisfied with him than someone like Sino, even though I think Sino is pretty decent and underrated as well. But they kind of fit that kind of model where they're kind of worse than the other options are in those same teams, but they're by no means a bad character. Speaking of his teams, this is really the only team I would recommend using him in. Passives give him so much value, and not running any of these characters just really takes away a lot. Not running Bennett, not running Sangling, not running Kazuha. There are a couple things you can do. You can put Zhongli in the Sangling slot, and that will give you more survivability, but he loses too much damage, and I don't think it's worth it. I think you're better off just dodging the occasional attack. Missing an occasional charge attack is fine. The taunt will let you hit most of your charge attacks, and if you have to dodge and miss out on one, that's fine. You're just losing out on way too much damage if you don't run Sangling. You can run other options compared to Kazuha. You could run Zhongli in this slot. That might be good against very aggressive enemies. This Abyss isn't super aggressive, but against very aggressive enemies and single target focused bosses, you can run something else in terms of Kazuha, like Zhongli. I did test him fairly extensively with Dea, and I didn't really like it. Losing too much damage from Sangling was just not worth the trade-off. I know a lot of people, including myself, were really hoping that Dea would get a buff and actually work with Lyney, but unless your Lyney is really cracked out with his 5-star weapon and really amazing artifacts, I just don't think there's enough damage on this team to really work. You can trade Dea for Zhongli, and I don't have Zhongli on this account. I'll get him as soon as he reruns again, but I still think that the damage loss is not worth it because Zhongli brings that Pyro Shred, yes, but you already have plenty of Pyro Shred from Kazuha with the VV, so I don't even think that the damage will be that much better than with Dea, and it will still be very lackluster compared to Sangling. I would just get used to running him without a shield, but fortunately I feel better about him running without a shield than I did pre-release. His taunt and the healing from Bennett are good enough most of the time. Basically, it's just when you get one-shotted that it feels really bad, which definitely happened to me a number of times. You can switch out Kazuha for Sucrose if you have her C6 especially. It's going to be a little bit better, but it's still nowhere near what Kazuha can do with the buffing, because Lyney doesn't use her EM buffing at all. You can run a different animal unit such as Lynette and build her for personal damage. That's going to be solid in single target where you don't need grouping. But as soon as you need some grouping, you're going to really feel a difference about not having Kazuha. And I generally think that this is the only team I would recommend for the Abyss. For outside the Abyss, you can replace Xiangling and Kazuha with different teams. You can do some melt stuff, you can do some vape stuff, but I generally don't like it. A lot of people have also talked about his synergy with Thoma. Can you run Thoma? I mean, Thoma, after all, does give that charge attack boost. Unfortunately, because Thoma, his burst and his shield only refreshes from normal attacks, and you're really not going to be using any normal attacks on this team, I highly advise you not to run Thoma. It's not going to be a good experience at all. It's just like if you try to run Thoma with Ganyu, it feels really bad. If you're doing the overworld, you can replace Kazuha with Layla perhaps, or Xiangling with Layla or Rosaria, and do some reverse melt stuff, and that could be okay. But this is really the only team that I like on him, and that's just my opinion. Everything else is just too much of a lot. Now that we know his teams, let's talk about how to build it. Starting with his level, you can absolutely leave him at 80 out of 90. Taking him to 90 will not give you nearly as many returns as most characters. Eventually you can go there, but I personally will probably never take him to 90. 80 out of 90 is going to be totally fine. I did do the final ascension because he gets a lot from his attack, his talent scaling, so I do want to ascend him, plus that crit damage bonus is nice, but personally 80 out of 90 is where I'm going to stop. Some people have also asked about Burjin. I don't recommend it with Burjin. Again, he doesn't have synergy with Xingqiu and Yalance because he can't normal attack, so I think Burjin really is just not good. There's just no reason to do it. His power application is also very inconsistent. With Burjin, you kind of want a consistent power application, but with him you don't, so no reason to level 90. For his talents, you want to prioritize his normal attack, and his skill and burst are pretty much equal. I'm going with 988. Eventually I would like to 999. If you're really maining him, you might even want a crown, because he is scaling off of his personal damage numbers, not off of reactions, so you're going to get more value, and he has pretty good scaling from his attacks and from his talent levels. For Lyney's weapons, by far his best one will be his signature bow. It's about a 10% increase above the other really good 5-star options, which is a really significant amount considering how much of the team damage Lyney actually contributes to. So if you have Aqua, Harp, or Pulse, they're all going to be great. Not quite as good as his signature, but still very good. Polar Star technically can belong up here, but if you were using his artifact set, which you should be, and he has a crit rate ascension stat, you're going to be getting so much crit rate. So Polar Star is going to be extremely hard to get artifacts for, and practically it's going to end up more in this tier. I'm using the Amos bow, and he feels good even at this level, so I would really like to try him with some of the better weapons, but maybe one day. You can use the craftable prototype Crescent, but because you have to hit a weak point, I'm really not a big fan. Some enemies don't even have a weak point, and who wants to aim at a weak point every time you're fighting? It's pretty bad. Hunter's Path is going to be really rough for him as well, because that's so much crit rate. I would just, because of the damage, it's so close to even the new craftable. So the new Fontaine craftable is actually really good for him, giving him attack percentage and damage percent is really excellent. So I would definitely craft this if you have nothing else. It's actually going to be quite good along the same levels of this. And by the way, I got this information from the Genshin scientist and his math on the weapons, so definitely check him out if you want to see his math. I rely on him a lot for the calculations he does, whereas I mostly rely on myself for the practical how things really feel, but definitely check him out. Speaking of artifact sets, Lyney got a brand new artifact set with just this update, and I have already a usable set for it. My Goblet is really cope and my offset's pretty good, but my Sands is actually great, being 30 crit value. My Feather is freaking amazing, and my Flower is very good for him as well. So I've actually been able to test him on his new artifact set, and I think that this goes a long way in showing me where his true potential ends up, because I'm a lot closer than a lot of people because of how lucky I got with these artifact rolls to seeing where his peak potential actually lies. I can get some better artifacts, but this is going to be really good already. This set, if you think about it, it's kind of like the Blizzard Strayer set. If you're a character that increases and decreases their HP often, which Lyney does within his kit, you are getting 36% crit rate from this artifact set, which is absolutely insane, along with getting normal and charge attack damage percent. It's a really insane artifact for people who can use it. It's even arguably Zhao's best artifact set, even better than his signature set, as long as you can make the crit rate work. And this is one of the things that makes him a bit harder to build. You're always going to want a crit damage mask because he gets a crit rate ascension stat and a crit rate artifact set. So a crit damage mask, power damage goblet, attack sands, and as much crit and attack as you can muster, especially crit. So he's kind of a hard character to get artifacts for. It'll probably take a long time to max him out. I'm lucky that I was able to get a good set on day one, and I think that the more people farm this artifact set, the better he will actually feel. Until you get a guard artifact set, the difference between this and his other options are just too great. Sure, you can use Lava Walker, sure you can use a 2-piece attack, 2-piece power damage in the meantime, but nothing is going to come even close to this set for Lyney. For constellations, and for just talking about vertical investment overall, as we've mentioned multiple times in this video, he gets a lot from vertical investment. He gets a lot from his 5-star signature weapon. He gets a lot from his constellations. Each of his early constellations up to his C3 give him a lot. So you can kind of choose your stopping point. Any of C1, C2, or C3 are really, really good. I think C1 is kind of the worst of the three, and C2 and C3 are going to be pretty big power increases, but C1 is still quite good. It's just that you're only getting this effect only once every 15 seconds, so really once every rotation, so the total team damage is not as crazy as for his C2 and C3. C3, he's actually the first character to get a normal attack increase. I am so mad that this didn't go for Yoimiya. They need to retroactively add that, and I'm pissed. For his artifact stat, breakpoints, as we already talked about, you want to build as much crit damage on him as possible. You don't want to go any more above 64% crit rate. Anything above 64% crit rate is completely wasted because he gets that 36% from his artifact, and obviously you want to aim for as much crit damage as possible. For energy recharge, I'm not sure currently whether or not it's better to build a bit more energy recharge so that you can burst every rotation. I think it is, because I don't have all that much ER. I have 116%, and I've been able to burst every rotation without any issues. So I would recommend kind of 115 to 120% ER personally, just what you can get from your substats. If you don't get it, you know, I'm running Fav on Sangling and Fav on Kazuha, so that's probably why I can burst every rotation. If you're not running Fav on these two, or at least not on Sangling, and you don't have any ER subs, then maybe you want to switch to bursting any of your other rotation, but I don't think that's been calced yet, so it's unlikely you'll actually be able to choose, unfortunately, how much ER exactly you get for a while. So by the time that you actually have enough artifacts to choose from, we'll have done more calcs at that point. But for now, if you can burst every rotation, you want to aim for 115 to 120. Just looking at the builds for his teams quickly, I'm running Sangling on Emblem and on Fav, and that's what I recommend just for that ease of rotation for ER. You can definitely get away with the catch, but I'm a scrub and I like to have more ER than I need. I'm running Fav on Kazuha, and I'm running the Skyward Blade on Bennett because I like to have enough ER. Now, versus Klee, this is a topic that was hotly debated, and I think that the debate itself is kind of skewed and unfortunate because people don't really have a very good appreciation of Klee, but I would like to take this time and say that Klee Mono Pyro is actually very, very strong. It's not a weak team. I think that Klee is either a tier 2 or a tier 1 unit. I'm not sure anymore. I think that she might just be a bit behind Lyney because she doesn't have that nuke damage. That's my personal feeling after having played Klee for a while and having played Lyney for a while. But maybe someone who's really, really min-maxing Klee and really doing everything you can, she can rival him. I personally think though that Lyney is the better character, and I think it's close, but I do think it's noticeable. It definitely feels way, way better to have that front-loaded big burst of damage that his skill gives you for popping those hats. And I'm personally a much bigger fan of Lyney. I definitely think that he is the better character than Klee. But if you have a Klee, you know, it's not like you're going to see this massive increase from Lyney. Maybe if your Lyney has his signature weapon or Aqua Simulacra, there'll be a bigger difference. Because for me, like, I don't think Klee's like 5-star weapons, she doesn't really scale nearly as well with vertical investment. So although they're close at C0, with his signature weapon, with a constellation or two, I think Lyney is going to kind of wipe the floor with Klee, in my opinion. Versus other Mono Pyros or other characters we've already talked about a lot, he definitely wipes the floor with Dia Mono Pyro, wipes the floor with the Luke Mono Pyro, but I don't think he quite hits Artalia's level of AoE damage, and that's kind of where he sits versus them. For future prospects, I would be pretty interested to see if there's any way that he can synergize with the Archon, because they often like to make the Archon synergize with the characters of the region, or at least they have in Sumeru. So I'll be interested. I don't know. His kit highly incentivizes Mono Pyro, so I think the biggest thing that I'm going to look out for Lyney is if we get another off-field pyro DPS in the future. Maybe Arlecchino will be an off-field pyro DPS, Copium. Maybe one day we'll get a side grade to Bennett and Sangling. That's what I really want the most, so we have more team options. Maybe some of those other teams will assist with doing other types of like shield breaking or elemental application somehow, so that we can have a mono pyro team but not have it be completely restricted to dealing pyro damage. I don't know. That's kind of what I would look for, is something that can switch up his teams a little bit, because right now I think I could see some room in his team. Like if you look at his team, 2 out of the 4 characters are given away for free, essentially, with Bennett being the Star Glitter Shop and Sangling being literally free in the Abyss. I don't think Hoyoverse wants a character's best team to have 4 stars in it forever, and especially 2 out of the 4 characters. I think they're going to want to monetize the mono pyro team comp, so I expect to get future characters like Deep. For Overworld and Aesthetic, one of the best things that Lyney is good for is having the little hand on the map to show you where the regional specialties are. Going to be very useful for those that do end up getting him, so that you can find the things on the map. It was super useful for getting his and Lynette's Ascension materials. I don't know how to play this game without these characters to find them on the overworld, but it is more painful. But fortunately, there is the Genshin map, so you don't have to get a character like this. I absolutely would not recommend wishing for a character just so that they can, you know, see those things in the overworld. But it is really nice if you do get him. My only gripe for him in the overworld is that he doesn't have synergy with Yelan, and for me, Yelan is a must use in the overworld. I really can't, like, not being able to run everywhere with Yelan's skill is really annoying for me now that I've been spoiled with her. So personally, I probably won't be using him in the overworld unless I need to find those regional specialties, but it is very useful for that. For his aesthetic, it's not my cup of tea. I love his hat. I love his animations. His animations are fantastic. I love his party setup screen animation. It looks absolutely fantastic. But, you know, I know his shorts and tights are people's favorite part about him. It's not my cup of tea, but I definitely appreciate that a lot of people are really into that. So that is awesome. I'm very happy for you. If you've been enjoying the video, please consider giving it a like and subscribing. We are almost at 10,000 subscribers. Thank you very much. We just passed 1 million views, which is unbelievable. I did not expect this just 6 months after starting my channel. If you want to support the channel, please consider joining the Patreon. While Lyney's banner is active, all new Patreon joins go towards the weapon banners. Normally it would go to support my family, but for the time that this banner is active, it will go towards to see if we can get a 5-star bow for my account, which I do not have yet. I'm currently at 20 pity, so if you want to see me test him or other characters with a 5-star bow, then you can do that, but no pressure at all. If you want to join our Discord and check out a great community of people, you definitely can. I've been live streaming a lot more, so try and check me out on YouTube for live streaming. And if you don't want to do any of that, that is totally fine. Just watching the video has been more than enough. Thanks so much for watching. Bye for now.